In order to filter content on a page, we are going to utilize the HTML5 data attribute, which is probably one that you are not familiar with. The way the data attribute works is it starts with a data and a dash, and then you are creating something called a tag. And the tag can be really whatever you want it to be. In the example that we're looking, the name that we're going to use is tags, but it does not have to be tags. Okay, so it needs to be data dash and then something else. Okay, so you can call it tags, you can call it whatever you want, and then you also have to have a value, and the value can be any string. So how this looks in our code is we've got data dash tags, and again, the word tags can be whatever you want. Okay, you could say data dash categories or data dash filter categories. Okay, so it can be whatever you want. Okay, you set it equal to, and then it has to be equal to a string. And as you can see, you can have more than one thing in the string. You're just going to want to put commas or something in between so that you have a way to identify different groupings and split them apart. So in our example that we're working with, we're calling it data dash tags, but like I said, you can call it data dash categories, data dash filter categories, whatever you want. Okay, we are going to be using the data attribute for filtering and sorting, and it's actually really slick. And it lets you selectively display things on your page without using Ajax and without reloading. So first step in setting up a filter is to figure out how you want to group the data that you're filtering. And the example that we are looking at is this one from the book. And by default, it shows all the graphics. And then you can filter on these different categories. Okay, but when it first displays, it shows everything. And I actually have this open because I wrote to the council so I can show you how the code works. So we'll be coming back and kind of taking a look at this object in a few minutes. So step one, you set up your HTML with the data attribute and the different categories that you want to filter on. Step two, you create your JavaScript external file. And you'll notice that this is actually jQuery that we're using here. And so we've got a couple variables that we're defining. The first one is images. So if we take a look, it's looking at all of the images that are inside our gallery ID. So here we have our gallery ID, and it's actually looking at all of these images. So we basically have a node list here. Then we've got a button ID, which is up here. Okay, and we're basically going to be targeting that area to generate these buttons. And then we have a variable called tagged. And this is going to be used to store our categories that we're going to be filtering on. And it's also going to store the images that should display in each of those categories. And how do those categories and images get into the tagged object? This next section of code, images.each, is going to run through every single image. It's going to retrieve the tag, and it's going to split the categories and then add the graphics that correspond to each category. So how does it do that? It's using the each method. So you know that it's going to process each image because that's what that method does. And so the current image that we're working on goes into the image variable. And then if you notice that we have data dash and the name we're using is tags. So the tags for the image are stored in tags. And then we check to see, well, are there tags? Because it is possible that we didn't include the data tag attribute. Okay, so does the tags exist? And if they do, then we are looking for a comma because we need to do a split. Okay, so when we split them, we're going to process each one. And we check to see if the category is in the tagged object. So if we process the first one, animators, at this point, the tagged object, when we subscript in with animators, it is going to equal null because we haven't added anything yet. So it creates a little empty array, okay? And then the next thing it does is it takes the image, okay, which is this one, and it adds it to the array. So it's adding it to tagged animators. And then it processes the next category, which is illustrators. So it says, does illustrators, when you subscript into the tagged object, does that exist? Well, no, it doesn't yet. So then we create the array and it adds the same image to that array. Okay, and now it is done processing our first picture and it moves on to the second picture. Okay, and it basically does the same thing. Now we're on picture 2, and this, which is now picture 2, goes into image. The data tags for picture 2, which is photographers, comma, filmmakers, that goes into tags. We check to see if there's something there. There is. And we split it on the comma. And then for each one, it's going to run through this code. So it's now checking. Okay, so if we subscript into tagged with photographers, does that exist? No, it doesn't. So it creates that empty array and it adds the image to photographers. Okay, so now picture 2 is in photographers. And then it comes back up and it checks filmmakers. Does filmmakers exist? No, it doesn't. Creates the empty array, takes picture 2, sticks it into filmmakers. And then we go down to picture 3, and it goes through the same process. So by the end of this, it has processed every single picture. It has created all these categories, and it has added the images to each of the categories. And so what I did in this code is I added a console log right down here so you could see what that looks like. And here it is. So we have animators, that has 2 in the array, illustrators has 3, photographers has 4, and you can actually see the arrays. And furthermore, you can actually see what images are in them. Okay, probably more information than you'd want to know. And you'll notice if I point, it is actually showing me what pictures it added. Okay, it kind of highlights them over on the left, which is kind of cool. Okay, but that's how it is creating all of the categories. The next section of code shows us how it's creating these filter buttons. Okay, so here is the button section. So this first button displays when we first load the page, and initially creates an empty button and it adds the text show all. And it makes that button active. And then it creates a event handler for clicking uh, so that when it first loads, it's active. And then if we were to click on something else and click back on show all, okay, then it's going to run through this click code. Okay, so this click code kind of comes into effect when they've got a different category and come back to show all. So what it does when they click on show all then is it makes that class active and it looks at the siblings, which are all the other buttons, and it removes the active class. And in our CSS, as you can see, the active class has a different color. And that's coming, the color is coming from CSS, but the class designation is coming from our code. Okay, so basically when they click on show all, class becomes active. All of the other buttons, the active class is removed. And then we basically show all the images. We don't actually do a filter on show all. Okay, and then once it's generated this button with the event handlers, we add it to buttons, which if you remember was created up here, targeting our button ID. So all of this code is just for show all. Now, how do the rest of the buttons get generated? Okay, that is this code down here. It's going to go through tagged. And remember, tagged is this object that we were looking at over here that's got animators, illustrators, photographers, filmmakers. Okay, this is tagged. And you'll notice that it ends up pulling the text and displaying it for the buttons. And then it's displaying the number of items in the array right next to the button name. And this little chunk of code down here is where that is done. So it's going to go through each of those properties that are in the tagged object. And we've got a little anonymous function and it's passing the tag name. Okay, so that's animators, illustrators, okay, all of those categories. It starts by creating an empty button. And then for the text, it's displaying the tag name. And then you can see it's concatenating a left parenthesis. And it's subscripting in to tagged using the tag name. And then it's got dot length. And so that's how we're getting the length of the array. And then we're adding on the right parenthesis. So that's where the text for animators, illustrators, photographers is coming from. Then we create a event handler for when they click on the buttons. Okay, so if they click on a button, then the current button, the one they clicked on, we're going to add a class of active. For all of the siblings, which are all the other buttons, we are going to remove the active class. Okay, and then we do need to do some filtering on the images. We can't just show all of them. So what we do with our images is we hide all of them. And then we run the filter method and we subscript into tagged using the tag name. And again, the tag name is those categories. Okay, so this entire object here is tagged and we're subscripting in with animator, illustrator, photographer. Those are our categories. Okay, and then for that category only, we're going to show the images. So we're basically showing the images that are in that category's array. Okay, and then we append that to buttons. So that is how all of those buttons are getting generated. And that is how the images are either displaying or they are being hidden.